Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
We have seen Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi.
And we have a guest with us.
We do. Say hello.
Hello.
This is Matt. This is my mate Matt. And Jose's mate Matt. Friend
Yes.
to all, really.
Friend to few, but also to all.
And he came with us. So maybe you should start. Did you have a good time?
I had an adequate time.
Adequate.
Yeah, I'm sort of still a little undecided on it, but I think I'm leaning towards not really having enjoyed it because I thought it was quite messy, and I'm not really sure that it's left the Star Wars saga in a better place than before it had started.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's really added too much, other than that maybe a couple of thousand people have died to the overall tale.
It's interesting. We should say before we go on that obviously there's going to be heavy spoilers. We're going to talk about everything. I mean,
Yeah.
anything anyone says about Star Wars will be a spoiler, and obviously we're going to talk about the lot.
Yes.
So just that word
As
warning.
is usual with us, we'll
As
spoil
usual.
your viewing pleasure.
We must we must get a little jingle in place that goes, and there's going to be spoilers. Like that. Anyway,
So aside from whether it added or not to the Star Wars saga, did you have a good time watching it?
In parts I did. I think that the worlds were really sensitive this time, and I think that Star Wars very often doesn't do that. So I like that they kept it sort of relatively slick and tight, and there were maybe only 4 or 5 environments, and they were all done really, really beautifully well. I thought that was to its credit. I thought that an awful lot of the action was really enjoyable, especially the sort of one-on-one fight scenes, the lightsaber sequences. I thought that they were the sort of second to none. But then a lot of the other stuff in between, I just didn't really sort of feel all that attached to. I didn't warm to any of the characters particularly, especially the ones that are sort of new to the story.
Okay. That's interesting, because for me, I felt it had the most attractive cast of any of the Star Wars films, actually.
physically attractive.
No, just in terms of being relatively human and appealing and so on, right? Because obviously the very first ones were, because Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, and the young Mark Hamill were kind of, I don't know, sparky, right? Like kind of, they were fun to watch. Since then, I mean, and particularly the middle ones,
Yeah,
with
the
Ewan McGregor,
prequels.
it's like, And actually, I've often loved those actors. I've loved Ewan McGregor and other things, but he's so dull in that, right? And Natalie Portman, who I worship, everything is dull in those films, really. Whereas I thought, Adam Driver and John Boyega, and I mean, they were wonderful to watch, I thought. I also thought there was more attention to the basics of filmmaking than I remember seeing in any of the other films, So, when Adam Driver's introduced, and they kind of, they give him this Byronic look, this kind of like romantic kind of, they've taken care with how they're photographing the Adam Driver for TV, who actually looks like a kind of a regular bloke, kind of a little bit ugly or whatever, and they've turned him into this romantic evil figure, right? Like, so I thought kind of all of those things were like really quite wonderful, really. The only thing that I was unsure of, it befuddled me, was the star, the young actress who's playing
Daisy Ridley.
Yeah, The Last Jedi, because I got her confused with Keira Knightley.
Daisy Ridley can't deliver a line in peacetime. She's really good, I think, when she gets angry and when her character's got something to fight for. But when it's just a kind of pretty regular dialogue scene, I find her so difficult to buy, basically.
Yeah.
I can't listen to her.
Well, for me, the interesting thing is I shut my eyes and I really hear Keira Knightley. It's the same voice, it's the same accent, right? And then the other thing, though, is that I personally find Keira Knightley is so astonishingly beautiful, whereas...
I don't.
Yeah, I know. kind of there's a lot of hate for Keira Knightley. But
I don't hate her. I don't hate her. And I certainly don't hate the way she looks, but she's just you can't criticise Keira Knightley for not taking advantage of her opportunities, because I don't think she's very good. Basically,
I think she has been good in things. But anyway,
that's nothing to do with this.
That's another discussion.
Daisy Ridley, I think, is also not very good, essentially. Although she has quite... but no, actually, that's unfair.
I think she's better than Keira Knightley.
She probably is.
She's...
Yes, I was going to say, I think I'm being unfair to her, because actually, when she gets angry, and when she really gives herself to the scene, there's a few moments where she just kind of screams, quite gutturally, and those are quite sort of... they connected with me, you know. I felt, you know, her character, kind of feeling rage and anger and determination, everything in these really properly. It's like in 300, you know, where he goes, "This is Spartan." It's so stupid, but actually, she's they're giving themselves so much to the scene. You really buy it, I think.
What I really loved about the film was actually that they make a young woman, you know, the Last Jedi. Yeah, it turns a lot of things upside down in the series in a way that I find interesting. So, you know, one of the things that I hated about kind of the recent ones, and actually, there was a period in which I read, all the novelizations and novels, because, you know, Star Wars created this whole world, so there was a lot of novels that sprung out of it and so on, right? And it all made it seem like, you know, one of those medieval, you know, sagas where it's all about blood, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
You know, it really is about an aristocratic attitude to the world, that if you've got the right blood, you know, you'll be a Jedi and you'll save the world, and otherwise you can die, right? You're nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas I thought what this film was so interesting is it turns that on its head.
It really puts all of its faith in women, because there are a couple of goals, which are, you gotta protect Princess Leia.
Yes.
She's imperative, and she's a woman. And then Daisy Ridley goes off to find Luke Skywalker, and he says, like, "I'm no use to you.
Yes.
Like, I'm not here to help you." So displaces that sort of that masculine independence again.
Yes.
And then when John Boyega's off on his mission, right, he can't do it without the little girl he finds just hanging around in the bay. Yes. Because she's the one that can hack into the computer. It sort of makes a hero out of women, like left, right, and centre. I
loved all of that. You know, the Laura Dern character is part of that as well, right? So the person who sacrifices herself, it's kind of the Laura Dern character.
Yeah,
so actually,
in a really unmasculine way, and they really make a point of that as well, which is that the guys are always off trying to fight and trying to be the hero, and the sort of the women just sort of bubble under the surface and actually just end up doing what's right.
Yes.
Whether they get the props for it or not.
She's strong and stable.
I also thought the whole racial thing was unimaginable when the first series came out. You know, like which I mean, think about it. You know, the first Star Wars comes out in 1977, and all the protagonists are blonde. You know, like they are. Yeah. And actually, it's when they go into other worlds that you see different kinds of people, and really, all those different kinds of people are Muppets or whatever, right? Whereas actually, this is a really multiracial Star Wars, and there was a while in the film when I thought, well, the reason why it's multiracial is because they probably got Chinese financing or something. But then, kind of, you know, when The Last Jedi and the John Boyega character kind of embrace, you think, oh, well, you know, kind of, you know, that's quite a major thing in a kind of a major franchise like this, you know, to have it kind of be multiracial in a way, you know, that's not just relegating kind of, you know, ethnic people to supporting parts, right? And kind of where there's a multiracial kind of romance at the heart of it. I thought that was quite amazing.
I think this film, because people really commented on it in the Force Awakens, and that's because it was the first Star Wars in years. You're introducing a whole set of new characters, so people really notice, oh, well, you're making a girl the hero, no, you're making a black guy hero, and so people really noticed it and said, oh, you're being overly sensitive, or whatever, however they decided to criticise it or praise it. This film has an advantage in that that's basically all been set up. So now you know the characters, and it's not really a question of that anymore. You're just getting on with the characters you already have. Although, as you said, they do bring in a whole set of new characters, and they are variously, several of them are Chinese, or kind of East Asian origin, I guess. The film is kind of less pointing at that, and actually, you just don't really question it, I think.
No, but I
what I noticed more actually was the age of Princess Leia and her second in command, the Laura Dern character.
Yes.
What I really noticed was those two partially being women, but partially being kind of old women,
Yes.
right? And they're kind of noticeably old and wrinkly, and these kind of elder stateswomen, if you like, but who are nonetheless totally in charge. I kind of noticed that more, I guess. I felt like that was more interesting.
They really give you that when they're just spending probably 5 minutes of airtime just on hand shots, and it's just like someone's young hand touching someone's old hand, and some guy's hand touching some girl's hand, and then there's a gloved hand, and then there's a dream hand, and it's just like
you really notice it, and because obviously there's a passing on of things, right, of the struggle, of hope, of whatever. But speaking of the Laura Dern Carrie Fisher thing, I also thought it was very unusual to have two women of that age, being in positions of power, commanding things, and being the figures of authority, and also kind of, the hand holding between them, the mutual knowledge and support between them, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of very unusual to see in a film like this.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I really appreciate that. There's one particular scene towards the end, I think, where the two of them. It's the scene where Laura Dern says, "I'm going to stay behind."
Yes.
And you get this real feeling that there's a real history between them, and they've been old friends for a long time, and despite the fact that you haven't, she's a new character in this, but it feels so rich.
Yes.
From very, very little. I think it's great.
You know what I disliked most?
The little fucking bird things.
No, I love that.
well, I'm sure there's some merchandise you can buy because they were invented for it.
I know, but they were a good joke, though, and they were fun to see.
We'll maybe come back to
Yeah.
Anyway, come on. What did you hate the most?
What I thought was flawed in the film was the Mark Hamill character. Really.
Luke Skywalker, he's called.
Luke Skywalker. Obviously, he's central to the whole saga and everything, And the thing about Mark Hamill is that if you examine what he does, he does everything well. So when he cries or when he's meant to cry, he does actually cry, and so on. But I just think he's not good enough. He's not charismatic enough. And also, there's something about his body in a heroic part, that he just doesn't carry it off. You can't imagine him there's something trying to be evoked by having this lonely warrior in this island in exile, kind of, struggling with his conscience. And actually, I just don't see. I see what the film is trying to do, but I don't think Mark Hamill emanates that. So I feel this struggle in the sense that I think it's lovely to have him return in a central part, to the series. On the other hand, you wonder if maybe there was a reason why he wasn't so involved in the earlier ones. I actually don't think he carries it off. What do you think?
Wasn't so involved in the prequels where his character hadn't been born yet. His character, he couldn't have been in the prequels.
Okay.
Fair. But I know what you mean. I see what you mean. He obviously, when they bring Luke back, which they can't not do really. It's set in a world in which Luke still exists. You have no choice but to use Mark Hamill, and I kind of get what you mean. It's he's missing a certain X factor that really convinces you of his character, despite the fact that actually he's just putting in the work and kind of doing a good job. I kind of like I like him as a kind of he's basically becoming what Obi-Wan was at the start, this hermit. That although Obi-Wan is kind of still very much involved in wanting to do stuff, whereas Luke is. He's given up on everything, but he's kind of becoming that sort of hermit character who's old and kind of weak and
kind of uncharismatic.
I believed in him. I don't know. I believed in him. I like the fact that when he stood opposite Kylo Ren, at the end, I mean, I kind of felt like he looked really right, and that he looked interesting. He shouldn't have looked like a warrior because he's an old man, but nonetheless
He's an old Jedi.
He's an old Jedi, but
Jedi Knight.
But he's an old man still who's not been doing it for a long time, and now he's been convinced to come back to it and to stand up for what he believes, kind of deep down. So he shouldn't really be physically imposing, but he has he conveys that determination and that kind of putting every ounce of what's left in him into the fight.
Okay.
That's why I like that.
Okay.
What I did think was interesting is there's a game called Star Wars Battlefront, which is this kind of this online thing, and you get to play as I've never played it, I don't know exactly, but I think basically it kind of you have these huge Star Wars fights where everyone is a stormtrooper or a rebel, and then sometimes you get to be Darth Vader, or you get to be Luke, or you get to be Leia, and those heroes are like super overpowered in the game. Like when you see Darth Vader, you just run away because he's going to immediately merge you. Like it's that kind of level of overpoweredness. And I've never really got that from the films with Luke. You definitely got it with Darth Vader. That was his whole thing, and they built it really well in those original trilogy. But you never got that with Luke. Like he was always, despite the fact he became the kind of resistance symbol, he was always kind of a kid who was a decent fighter and a decent pilot. But I never felt it. And then in the games, it's like, if you see Luke, you run because he's going to get you.
Because he wasn't played by Mark Hamill.
I think that's kind of, in a way, like it somehow comes across in the game from what I've seen in a way that it doesn't in the films. And it's kind of bizarre because this film is then trying to say this is how incredible he was and what a legend he was. And actually, it's kind of suggesting a kind of legend of Luke, which I don't think was ever quite conveyed in the previous films. I don't know. I think if I hadn't seen those clips of the game, of showing actually what a badass he was, well, I wouldn't believe it from this film.
Yeah, I mean, what I remember from the novels and so on is that he does develop into that kind of figure, and obviously like Leia and him are like twins and so on. So I just think that to me Mark Hamill doesn't physically convey that. So I don't know, Matt. What did you think
of Mark Hamill?
Let's begin there.
I guess I didn't really think about him because as Mike says, there's not really any avoiding that he has to show up and he has to do his bit and he has to be like, is he the last Jedi? Like that's sort of what he symbolises. But I'm not sure what you maybe brushed upon just earlier on, that like you said that he's isolated himself and he's given up. I'm not sure that he ever did give up. I think he's always trying to do what he thinks is right, but he never really knows exactly what that is, and he always needs this guidance. And that's perhaps where his development is arrested, is that he never sort of thought enough for himself or did what he thought was the right thing to do. He was always sort of guided by what everyone else wanted him to do. So I think that when he shut himself away, it was because he genuinely believed that this thing had to die and everything had to start again until Yoda comes along or another Jedi comes along, or there's this sign that there's like a big evil force coming along to sort of remind him that maybe he does actually still have a part to play.
It is Yoda, isn't it? In the end, his master comes back. Well, he wasn't his master. Obi-Wan was his master. But,
but the ultimate master comes back.
Well, actually, no, Yoda was the guy who first trained him, wasn't he? Really?
Sure.
He got when he went to Dagobah. So you're right, Yoda comes back.
Comes back and says, you've been wrong all this time.
Yes.
You've actually still got to do something. You can't just sit here and this is not going to brush over.
I didn't like the bit. As soon as I saw those books, so he has this on the island where he's isolated himself. There's this kind of burnt out temple that contains these books, the original Jedi texts, and he goes to burn them and say this all needs to die. And then Yoda comes along and burns them for him to say, you don't need these, you never needed these.
I hated
that because I thought,
But
it's that
then
thing of,
they
what is
show up on the
inside you it
Falcon,
wants?
don't they? Like, I'm sure there's a scene where John Boyega like opens this little locker on the Falcon, and they're just inside because Daisy Ridley's already nicked them. I think there's like a really
didn't notice that.
I think there's a really brief glancing shot of that. So I suspect that what's happened is that Yoda's come along and known that these books aren't in there and gone, do you know what, I'm just going to screw with you a little bit.
Well,
let's
I
burn down everything that you
so.
think is
Yoda
sacred.
has that element too of, oh, it's
Mischief.
a scamper, mate.
Yeah, precisely.
Well, I hope so, because advocating, book burning when it's like the last 5 books that contain all the knowledge of the, is really like terrible.
Yeah, sacrilegious, isn't it?
Anyway, Matt, since we have you here, what did you think of the design of the film?
Yeah, I think that was really its strength, and like I say, I think that they kept it quite tight, and it was really, really neat because of it. So,
were there any images that kind of stood out for you, or that that you found particularly memorable, or any sets? Like, which parts of the film kind of stand out for you in terms of design?
I think that the strengths are always the bits where they're on ships, and I think that the way that they just go to town on all of those is always something to behold, and those are the bits where you most believe that they're in outer space, that they are in a galaxy far, far away. Because other than that, they always do tend to feel stifled by it, looking like they've just found a nice bit of the Earth that they can pretend is another planet.
Yes.
And
it's normally Morocco.
Yeah, but I think that was...
This time it looked like Scotland, actually.
I think the island where Luke is Ireland.
It was Ireland.
I believe so. But in all those other films, like Tatooine was always Tunisia, I think.
I love the way that they've used deserts in the past, and I think that works really well.
Yeah.
But I think that on this, the ships were really something special. And then I thought that the sort of the Gatsby-esque casino was really, really stunning. If a little totally shoehorned in.
I thought the costumes in that casino scene, right, like the care that they taken with the costumes and the hairdos and the jewelry, right, I thought was phenomenal. I thought kind of it's the best I've seen in the whole series.
But it really had to be, didn't it, to convey what the essence of that place was.
Yes.
Which was that it was this like gratuitous excess and the richest of the rich. And
I thought, and the message of the film in relation to that is so interesting as well, because it's got a real kill the rich message, right? You only ever get this rich by basically selling arms and killing millions of people. So, boom. It's quite an astonishing message to find in a big budget film.
I thought them. That was obviously kind of there, but I don't think that's not the central message of the film. I think there's so much to do with sacrifice, and actually kind of stupid sacrifice. People constantly throwing themselves at things on suicide missions, which and in some respects, like so, Laura Dern, her final way to save the rest of the rebels is to kamikaze her ship at hyperspeed straight into the giant, what's it called, the dreadnought, to destroy it. So that's kind of that really matters and that means something. But there's a lot of Finn,
a lot of guys who just want to...
Yeah, people kind of throwing themselves in ways that they think makes them heroes. Finn throws himself at this battering ram gun that's going to take down the door where the rebels are hiding behind. And everyone's saying this is stupid. You're not going to do anything, because he has to aim right down the center as it's firing. So and eventually, the girl runs her ship into his so that he'll be knocked out of the way, because it's an absolute suicide mission and no one respects the fact that he's doing it. It's interesting, like people, and obviously Poe is constantly looking for a fight. He wants a scrap, and he doesn't even think about whether he's going to die or not. And maybe he thinks that if he does die, Leia's the one who reminds him, the people that died in this fight that you got us into, you can call them heroes, but they're dead.
Yeah.
We need them. So the message is kind of complex. Like I don't that particular part of the message. It's kind of advocating really for just being smarter and looking at the bigger picture and not being so self-absorbed. Thinking about the people around you.
But I think that what's interesting about that is that it sort of... I think that they sort of stress that point that you shouldn't do what's selfish and what makes you a hero is because whenever they're portraying like Sith Force, it's about this selfish pursuit of ownership or dictatorship or being the guy at the top and ruling the galaxy. So I think that they try and advocate away from trying to be the hero, because that's what all of the bad guys are always striving to do, is to just be the guy in charge. That's what Adam Driver is. That's what.
Yes, in a way, but then
what Ken is after the whole time.
But then the Empire, you've got Snoke at the top, and you've got Kylo Ren, who is certainly very confused, ends up kind of seizing control of the Empire, and you've got Hux beneath him, who's in control of his army. But then below them, they've got this huge machine of people who are just cogs, and they're the people that make it work.
Yeah,
you know, and they're the reason that throughout the entire film, the rebellion is in a corner. Because
they're doing their job.
I think that to me the message is, one of hope, right? That kind of, if and they repeat it several times, like, if you, what did they say?
If you only look at the sun, if you only think it's light when the sun's out,
yeah,
then you'll never get through the night, or something like that.
Something like that, right? And I think actually that is the message of the film, really. Yeah, so kind of, they continue to live to fight another day, right? And actually the survival of that moment is a renewal of hope and a continued struggle, right? So,
I think they should have called it Star Wars A New Hope.
But I don't know, they are kind of the rebels,
because it certainly isn't The Last Jedi. They've got 3.
Yes.
The rebels do seem to be kind of making it up as they go along, though, the rebels. Like, so Laura Dern character, I'm quite conflicted about, because I don't know how much she's planned ahead, right? Like, she kind of knows that they're heading towards this planet where they can send out a distress signal, and obviously Poe then kind of ruins that by being impulsive. But then Laura Dern really should say what she's doing, right? If she wants to nip that in the bud, this kind of insurgents that we want to go and fight them, she wants to nip that in the bud because it's going to ruin everything. Say, this is what we're doing, keep your hair on.
No, but why would a general say that to like a captain who's just disobeyed an order? Why would you reveal a plan for the mission to a captain?
Wouldn't you just put him in jail? Because he should have just been in prison.
Because he's just ruining everything. Put him in the brig.
Well, that's true. So, but I just think it's interesting, because that's not a question you'd ask of Darth Vader. Why don't you reveal your plan to an underling?
But her plan nearly goes wrong. I mean, she loses loads of people. Darth Vader never had someone beneath him who was going, I'm just going to do what I like, I'm going to look for a scrap. Whereas Poe was getting out of order. She should have dealt with it.
I liked that character very much, and I liked her visually as well. With the pink hair and the kind of that slim look. She was kind of silly hat. Yeah, she was interesting to look at, right? And actually, I think that's one of the interesting things about this film, that it is really interesting to look at, and it keeps you busy looking. Right, kind of all of the scenes in the island were shot so interestingly. There was always like a tunnel, or the sea on a horizon. There were always these frames. The battle sequences where it all kind of went red, right? Kind of, I thought that was like such great.
In Snoke's chamber.
I'm thinking of the last battle.
No,
that's the one element
the Lord
of
the Rings fight at the end.
That's the one thing I was going to pick up when you guys were describing what your favourite visual images that you took away from it. That was mine. Was the salt planet that they end up on, and that you only have to scrape the surface, and there's these blood red crystals underneath.
Yes,
I thought that was incredibly beautiful.
Yes, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I also loved, which is, it's not so much visually, it's a narrative storytelling device, but it was the approach of ships, right, which now just seem to appear, bang, 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 right? I thought that was great and kind of exciting and kind of new. I don't think you could have done that, like, without digital, kind of. So it's just the appearance of an image fueled by sound that gives the impression of something just appearing, right? Yeah, I thought that was marvelous.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because it's different to the way that battles usually take place in all movies, which is that they have this enormous build-up and you see them approaching and your fear has time to grow.
Yes.
And that's the way that all of our fights have sort of existed in history.
Yes.
So for them to just do away with that and find a new way to just make these things just show up and be threatening immediately, I think it's quite It's quite a feat.
I think
Yes,
what I like
I thought
actually,
so.
it kind of, which is related to that, I think, is that you're seeing ships interact in a new way. I can't remember seeing ships in Star Wars before chase each other in this way, because you've had chases and you've had dogfights, but what you have here is the rebels just keeping themselves at arm's length. The Empire is sitting there with Star Destroyers and this huge dreadnought behind them, just following them, and just waiting for them to run out of fuel. So this whole film takes place during this standoff, where eventually push has to come to shove and they have to run out of fuel, and the Empire will catch up with them. That's interesting to me, because that's not these things are just hanging in space.
Yeah, that's
Just
very interesting.
waiting for the thread to be cut and something to happen.
What did you think of the central struggle, really, between now I'm forgetting the names.
Rey is the Jedi.
The Adam Driver and the Last Jedi.
Kylo Ren and Rey.
Okay,
Kylo
Kylo Ren and Rey. What did you think of that?
First thing I want to say is I really liked the way that so they end up kind of Skyping, really. They're connected via the Force,
Yes.
and they can speak to each other across the galaxy. And I love the way that they are shot as though it's a regular reverse shot conversation, where you see Kylo Ren on the ship and there's a shot of him looking to the right and saying something, and then the reverse shot is Rey on this isolated island looking left and talking back to him. So it's like they're next to each other, and that's wonderful. There's this it uses this classic, uncontroversial storytelling technique to connect these two people across the galaxy.
Yes.
I think that's fantastic, and actually becomes something that you just totally get used to.
Yeah, it's very good. But I think it's more complex than that, actually, because if you remember, there's also that moment where, what's his name again? The Adam Driver character?
Kylo Ren.
Kylo Ren. What a stupid name.
That's why I call him Ken.
There's the moment where he looks at his gloves and he has rain, the rain that's been on the island, right? So there's implication that he's somehow inhabited that space, right? That kind of, the rain has landed on his hand.
I thought you would like it because it's quite sensate, isn't it?
Yes, I like that.
Yeah. And then obviously it happens between Luke and Leia as well. They don't chat, but they connect in the same visual way.
But to return to my question, what did you think of that central relationship between, the force of evil and the force of good, and how they're conflicted, how there's both in each at the moment that we are introduced to them? Yeah.
Sadly, I didn't actually think it was that interesting.
Ah.
I don't know. I didn't really connect with it. I still think that Kylo Ren's an interesting villain. Which I thought he was a very interesting villain when he was introduced in the previous film.
I think it's great in this. I really do.
Yeah.
I think
What I think is really interesting about him as a villain is that you never really quite understand exactly what his motivation is, because it isn't necessarily to fulfill the greatest of evils, because if he was doing that, he'd just do what Snoke says.
Yes.
Because he's the big bad guy.
Yes.
And I think that it's quite sort of interesting and there's like a rich vein to be tapped that when he and Rey come together, they end up fighting. Well, they end up destroying Snoke.
Yes.
And to what end?
Yes.
Like,
well, you see, to me, that's one of the most interesting things.
What's
in the
his
film.
motivation? Why does he want to rule the universe with Rey?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that moment when we're shown that, it's more about his feelings for her than actually destroying Snoke, right? Because it becomes a choice of,
It's his perhaps his first moment of not feeling alone,
yes,
and not feeling betrayed.
Yes,
and I think that his character is a victim of his betrayals in life from everyone that he's seen as a sort of a father figure or as a parental figure, has let him down in some way, except this image of what Darth Vader could be. I think that's his paternal instinct, is to...
I think there's something, but there's a move in that, right? Because I think initially the destruction of Snoke's is fueled by his feelings for Rey. Yeah. And then he thinks they're going to do something. Yeah, so then there's an attempt to convince her that they can do something together. Yeah. So it's almost like he looks at the throne and he says, it's mine now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not what initially motivated the destruction of Snoke's, I don't think. It was really because the choice had become to kill her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or to kill him.
So I thought that was really interesting.
I think I'm thinking about it, and really, I just think Rey is a really boring character who I'm not interested in. And I like Kylo Ren, and I think his relationship with Rey is interesting for all the reasons that you've discussed about what he thinks of her and what that makes him think about himself. But she's not very interesting to me. I don't care what she wants. I don't care where she comes from. In fact, the fact that it turns out that she comes from nowhere, it's revealed that her parents they were just some junk traders. That she's not part of this aristocracy of good and evil that the films have built up. It makes sense because she's not very interesting. She comes out of nowhere. I'm not interested in why she is who she is.
I am, and actually I think the film makes it into an interesting question because, I think it's interesting that she's a nobody now doing these things, and it becomes even more so when you see the young stable boys, at the end, who clearly has some Jedi power as well, right? So
the Harry Potter kid with the broom.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I get why it should be interesting, but I don't think she is. I think she's extremely boring. Right. I was bored whenever she was on screen, to be honest, and it goes along with the fact that I don't think she can deliver a line.
Right.
I dislike watching her, in every way.
Well, let's move on.
You're just hurt because she's not Natalie Portman.
I think all women should be Natalie Portman.
You're putting her on a pedestal.
Yeah. But there are interesting aspects to Kylo Ren and to their relationship. I find it so very boring, and I think a lot of the film's too long. The film's 2.5 hours long.
I didn't think it was too long. I didn't experience it as long.
Everything towards the end of the film starts to become more significant, and that's the reason I think you. But for a long stretch, sort of early and in the middle, I was very bored really because there's just a lot of stuff happening. There are these kind of small errands really they have to run to build up the story. So like they have to go and get when they get in touch with Maz, who was introduced in the last film, the goggle-eyed woman, and they say, where can we find someone who's going to help us get onto the dreadnought to remove this tractor beam thing, this tracer beam. She says, you've got to go find the master. What's he called? The master
coder.
The master code guy. And I'm going like, when she says master code guy, I'm like, it's literally just, here's 20 minutes of a bit of plot that we are going to have to do.
What will Star Wars fans like? Let's put some of that in.
Yeah, here's a side quest.
I think
go off on this and spend some time. I really hated that because I thought, why waste this? This is just a. It's not a huge waste. Obviously, they go to this planet and stuff happens, and then the kids on it come back at the end and so on and so forth. And the relationship between Finn and the girl he's with is developed.
Yes,
but it is still, there's a lot of bits of business stuff happening that aren't really that significant in a plot
But I like
sense.
that, and I think it is significant because we're introduced to the Benicio del Toro character, the master coder, who is marvelous. Yeah, I thought.
Don't be biased because you're Hispanic.
No, I think he is marvelous.
Don't be biased because he's definitely the best guy in this whole movie.
Yes, exactly.
That's not true.
I think
Gleeson was, I reckon, actually.
No, I think Adam Driver's great.
I think Adam Driver's great. I think Benicio del Toro is great, and he's so charismatic, and he's born for that part. And
I don't think he's bad, but he's not.
He's
special.
fantastic.
No,
and he introduces another kind of moral dimension to the film.
He's the new Boba Fett, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's the new gun for hire.
Yes.
Character who's like just destined for greater significance in the Star Wars universe, I think.
I hope so. I hope we see him again. But actually, what he introduces is, the notion that kind of embodied by Bogart or something. People who've seen the war and say, well, this is shit and that shit, and really kind of you just got to survive and kind of skate through this, right? And all kind of these idealist and moral positions are all kind of bullshit. That's what he's signifying. So actually he straddles, that opposition between like good and evil, right? And he kind of glides underneath it. And I do think it sets up resonances in the narrative. It's not just about, being a rebel or, this black force, right? Kind of, there's another way, which is to not care, to just survive. So it's not idle.
Yeah, but I think you're overstating how good Benicio del Toro is. I mean, he's not bad, but I didn't come away from it going, oh, he stole the scene. He didn't.
I thought
he
he stole the scenes he was in.
Well, he's not going to steal any other ones, is he?
I really think he stole the scene where they were riding around on horses for some reason.
I just think, well, I mean, that's kind of neither here nor there. I still think there is too much stuff for a long time that feels quite inconsequential or directionless.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why when you asked me at the start what I thought about it, I was a little trepidatious because I still think that there's like 40 minutes that you can just probably bring down to 10.
Okay, well, you may be right. I mean,
I wouldn't want to be the one to make that, to do that edit. I wouldn't be the one who did, because obviously the film is very full.
Yes.
But what it's full of early on, I think, doesn't have enough connective tissue or not enough of a driving force behind it. That later on comes in when things start to feel more climactic and more significant. Obviously, they can't feel climactic the whole way through.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree, but I also think it's the best Star Wars movie that I remember.
Best in Episode 5.
Yes.
Which you love.
Well, yes, I kind of, that had been my favorite one until this one. I like this one better. And maybe that's just not saying very much about the Star Wars films, right? So, because I don't think you're necessarily wrong. I think there is a lot of stuff and so on. But actually, I kind of, I loved looking at it. I loved the action. I loved the worlds it created. I loved the fact that, there were more characters and they were doing really interesting things with them, right? So maybe it's just, Star Wars films really aren't very good and this is the best of a bad lot. But I liked it.
Yeah, you could tell, you could see Rian Johnson's kind of controlling hand behind it. He's got quite a strong control of tone throughout the whole thing, I think. I mean, the thing about the way that he cuts across galaxies to have conversations happen as if they're next to each other reminded me of Looper, actually, where there's that scene in Looper where Paul Dano's character in the future, Paul Dano's character's come back from the future to when he's younger and he's now trying to escape. So what they do is the bad guys capture Paul Dano's younger character and start cutting body parts off, and those changes in his body are immediately related to the old guy who just loses a leg, just disappears. There's this wonderful thing of something happening across time instantly, and that reminded me of that. Although it's not happening across time, it's happening across space, across great distances, but it's like you're right there. It reminded me of it, and I think there is great control of tone and of space and of you're never confused by anything. To a point early on, I think it's kind of patronising at points where they were explaining everything through dialogue so heavily. We have to go here. This is the last ship. We have to get this one away. You go, just chill out. I'm not 5, right? Nonetheless, I think it's kind of. I felt that there's such a level of control and competence behind what you're being shown. Nothing's really left to chance. Everything seems to be down to decision. Although I don't like some of the jokes. Actually, I think more of the jokes fall flat than land, and there are moments where the jokes undercut scenes which would be better if they were fully dramatic. Like, for instance, when I think Rey's practicing or something, and there's a bit where I think it's the bit where Luke kind of goes, "Oh my God, you're scarily powerful. You're as powerful as Ben Solo was, and I can't train you because you should not, this should not be unleashed." And then I can't remember what it was. There was a little joke put into it, and thought in between this, that's not the place for a joke. This is supposed to be so dramatic.
The Avengers effect, I call it, because the Avengers is just this sequence of 5-minute skits put together where you have a punch and a joke, and then a glance to camera, and it just repeats that for 3 hours.
Yeah.
I think there was
a lot of stuff with that fucking bird thing.
Oh yeah.
That everyone's going nuts over on the internet. A porg, I think it's called, and it's just. Get the birds out of my film. They're not funny enough.
Anyway, you've been complaining, and yet you came out of the cinema and you started with your lightsaber.
Well, yeah, they gave me a bit of paper.
Let's not forget that it exists to sell toys.
They gave me a bit of paper that I could roll up into a lightsaber. What am I supposed to do? Just leave it. Maybe I am 5.
Well, I think that, it's a kind of the film incites that mood, right? So that's a good thing. It's kind of it's a compliment to the film.
I didn't have a bad time. I didn't have a great time. I felt it kind of plodded along in some respects. I do think that I'm kind of over Star Wars in some respects, like I was from the last one. Well, when I saw the last film, right, and it was the first time Star Wars had been out in 10 years or something, and it said Star Wars at the start and the music came in, I felt something, man. I felt like, oh my God, Star Wars is back. And now I felt when Star Wars came up at the start and the music happened, I didn't actually feel anything. I think I'm done with Star Wars, although I will continue to see it.
Well, see, I felt rather different because I saw the film when it came out. I was 15 when it came out, and I didn't think much of it then. But I realized, like, what is that now? From 1977 to now, it's 40 years?
40 years.
Right? So, here's a world that's now 40 years old, and I think this film has revived it and given it kind of a power and force that to me it didn't have until now. Like, I think it's one of the most interesting of the Star Wars films in a way that it hasn't been for 40 years. So it's quite likely that it'll continue another 40 years. And actually, for the first time, I think, well, that might not be a bad thing.
It's definitely found new, interesting things to mine, new themes and new characters and
new relationships.
New relationship and a new kind of style and tone in the way it tells its story.
And I can't underline the fact of it being multiracial, how important I feel that is. Yeah, and actually how almost inconceivable it was in 1977. If you see the casting in 1977 and you see the casting now, it's like worlds apart. It's in another galaxy.
I think
far away.
Here with us now.
I wonder what
Once far away.
I wonder what you think about the idea that it's full of ghosts. This is something I really noticed throughout it. People are constantly talking to
that's
ghosts.
Interesting, yes.
Or appearing as ghosts, and then right at the very end, Luke projects himself as a ghost that can't be killed, and then somehow dies though.
And Carrie Fisher is a ghost in a way, right?
That's very harsh. That's very insensitive. How do you mean she's a
forget that Carrie Fisher is dead?
How do you mean Carrie Fisher's a ghost?
Well, because she's dead.
Oh,
so this
you
is
actually
her last,
did mean that.
This is her last appearance, right? Everyone's conscious of it, yeah. So actually there is a spectral quality to the film as a whole. I think it's an interesting idea that you mentioned.
And how are they going to get out of that one?
Yes.
Well,
that'll be the most interesting thing.
They'll just say in the opening crawl. In the opening crawl, Leia has sadly passed away. We all miss her very much. I found it really cheap.
Boo-hoo. Moving right along. Okay, final evaluation of the film. Would you advise people to see it? Would you recommend it? Do you think it's any good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd...
It sort of is. It starts to build up some real tempo, and the characters start to... You really feel the characters, and towards the end of the film, when you're cutting between these three different places, when you've got Finn and the girl trying to do the one thing, and you've got Rey doing the other thing, and you've got the Resistance. It cuts between them very effectively and builds a pretty great climax. And the scene, they end up on the salt between Kylo and Luke. I think it's terrific, and I think the twist in it is great. I mean, if people, if you're listening to this for a recommendation, we spoiled it. So, but I think that twist is really good. I didn't expect that.
Okay, Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not too sure because I guess I didn't really know what I was going into it expecting, and I didn't come away feeling any different to that. Like I still don't really know. I still don't really know too much about whether this is a film that adds something to what the fans want or to what people who love cinema want. Like it's this weird sort of pastiche of things where it's got like elements of all of these things, but perhaps none of them really come together.
Okay. Well, for me, it's my favorite of the bunch. I kind of, as you pointed out, Matt, there's a real kind of female-centeredness about this film that feels kind of very interesting and unusual. I love the multiracial casting and what the film does with it. I love the look and the design of it, and actually some of the ways that this, some of the action bits are terrific. So it's really my favorite of the bunch. So I acknowledge the faults that you both have with it.
I think it has a good director. I think it has the right director, actually. Because when J.J. Abrams made the last one, all of J.J. Abrams' films feel like each other, or they feel like they all live in the same universe. And because he did Star Trek, I think that's a problem. Like, it's not about whether one's better than the other, whether Star Trek is better than Star Wars or vice versa, but they can't feel the same. And this feels like Star Wars in a way that the last film actually kind of didn't, I think. This feels more authentically Star Wars in a way. I don't really know how to convey it otherwise, but like the last film felt like it knew it was Star Wars, and this film feels like it is Star Wars.
A good note to end. Well, thank you very much, Matt.
No problem.